Well, hello, amazing parents, and welcome to our series entitled Three Simple Steps, excuse me, Three Simple Steps to Instant Toddler Obedience. I know you're excited about this course, and I'm really excited to teach it to you because it is one of the most profound revelations that I've ever discovered about parenting. And the Lord taught me this directly through an interaction with my son when he was 2 years old, about 2 years old, which was almost 18 years ago. He's almost 20 now. And he taught me in real time. And so I didn't know what I was doing. I just was following the instruction of the Holy Spirit. And it wasn't until many years later, until I started understanding some of these powerful kingdom keys regarding parenting that are in the scriptures, that I actually figured out what was actually going on in that interaction with my son and why it worked. And so in this series, there's three simple steps. The first two steps are really giving you understanding of why the process works. It's not complicated, but if I give you the process before you understand it, you're going to get mixed results. Because here's the thing, you have to understand what you're doing in order for it to be effective. It's kind of like anything you do. If you're just blindly following instruction, but you don't really understand the process or why it works, it's not as effective. So with the understanding gives you a good foundation for you to realize what you're actually doing when you implement the process and why it's so powerful and why it's so important and why it's so effective. You'll also learn through these first two steps of how God has actually rigged it so much in our favor that it actually takes a lot of work to mess it up. And I see Christian parents all the time making a lot of effort, working really hard at getting poor results. And that's probably why you're in this course and why you signed up for it, because you're frustrated. You've been doing what you need to do and it isn't working. So with that said, let's get into the material. I'm sure there's a couple things that I should have said that I haven't said before we start, but they'll come up and I'll share those at that time. Just things about, kind of housekeeping, etc., and how to approach this course. First, let's talk about what we've been doing just briefly and why, and just review that real quickly. Maybe you've just bought this course independently, and so you haven't heard any of my other teachings. So I like to kind of go over that. But so the typical Christian parent is taught to give their child commands, and when the child doesn't obey the command, then they punish the child. And they keep doing that over and over again, hoping that the child learns to do what they're told. Well, there's a lot of reasons that doesn't work very well. For one thing, that's the same method that scientists use to train lab rats. And I don't think that we would compare our children to lab rats or even call lab rats obedient. In fact, anytime that a child or a rat is coerced to do something because of a reward or punishment, it's not obedience. That's bargain. That's a deal. That's actually compliance. So the rat learns through a series of painful experiences not to do certain things, and then he ends up doing what the scientist wants him to do, or because he gets a reward of food or treat or something, he learns to do things. So it's either a pain or a reward that causes him to learn what he wants to do and what he doesn't want to do. And so he's not choosing to do what the scientist says. He's learning for his own protection and pleasure to do certain things. Well, when we apply that to children, it's the same thing. They're not obeying. If you threaten your child with punishment and he does what you want to avoid the punishment, he's complying in order to avoid punishment. It's kind of like driving your car. Do you obey the speed limit because you believe in it and you think it's a good idea? Or it's because you don't want to get a speeding ticket? So there's a difference there. Same thing, if I wanted your money, I could hold a gun to your head and say, give me all your money, and you would probably do it. You would comply with my demand to save your life, but that's not obedience. So true obedience is given. It's given from a heart of trust. Just like love, you can't demand love or it's not love. If you demand obedience, it's not obedience. So the thing that we've actually been calling obedience isn't even really obedience, okay? So, what I'm going to share with you, first of all, is to understand how your child is wired, so that you can realize how he receives information, how he processes information. Because if you don't understand that, then you can't communicate with him effectively. Now, I learned this early on as a young parent. I was about 19 and a half years old. I had my first daughter I guess I was a little older than that. I had my first child when I was about 19 and a half. And when she was about a year and a half old, I started having that, trouble where, she's not doing what I want. And so I attended a parenting class, and the very first day I came home with tools that got me different results. And that's when I realized that it wasn't my daughter that needed training, it was me. So you see, if we keep doing the same thing over and over and over again and expect different results, well, we all know that's the definition of insanity. So if you want different results, you just change your input. The problem is we haven't known another way. And so until now, so you're going to learn another way that's going to get you the results that you want, and it's instant and permanent. So, I know one thing I was going to say at the beginning. I knew it would come back up. So the title to this series is Instant Toddler Obedience. Well, if your child's a little bit older, let's say he's in the 3 to 5 year old range, it's still effective, and you'll learn more about why there's this window of opportunity till about age 8, and after 3, it's really wide for the first 3 years of life, and then it starts kind of closing till about age 8. If you're in my coaching program, we'll address your child's age specifically and how this teaching relates to your child's specific age. But I've even used an adaptation of this approach to change my adult daughter's behavior. She didn't even know I was doing it. I hope she's not watching. So anyway, so it's still effective, but don't let the title of this series discourage you, thinking, oh, I've missed my opportunity. So it's not the case. But there are some little adaptations for different ages. So anyway, so we have to understand how our children receive information, how they process it before we can give them information, right? So I'll give you a little spoiler alert. Children don't process information. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about how your child is wired. We're going to talk about how they're wired cognitively, their brain development. So when a baby is born, the brain develops in 4 distinct stages or levels from the bottom up, so to speak. And the lowest, slowest brain waves are the first ones that a child has. They're the only ones that a child has for about the first 2 to 3 years of his life. So these are called delta brainwaves. They're the same brainwaves you and I have when we're in a deep sleep. So one scientist put it this way. It says that it's as if little children are asleep with their eyes open. And if you think about it, this is why most adults don't have any conscious memory before about age 3, unless there was something very traumatic. And this is because we weren't even conscious. And so children walk around in a subconscious state. They're living below the surface, so to speak. And so this is a huge thing for us as parents, because we're talking to our 2-year-olds as if they're fully on board here. And there ain't much going on up here at all. And actually, you're going to learn why that is a good thing. It's part of how God has rigged it in our favor to make it so much easier for us to train our children to be obedient. I know you're probably wondering, like, what in the world? How does this work? It's powerful. So So in this state, a child doesn't filter information. They don't judge or evaluate it. They just take everything in, and it goes in as fact because they don't know the difference between fact and fiction. In fact, a child doesn't know fact and fiction. Just that simple differentiation between fact and fiction doesn't develop till age 8. And if you think about it, that's about the time that children figure out or learn that Santa Claus is fiction. And prior to that, they just believe it because they believe everything. Everything comes in as fact. They don't think about it, evaluate. They don't have the ability to evaluate information, to judge, or to think things through, or to process, or to make decisions. And so we're expecting our 2-year-olds to do all these things. We give them information. We say, do this, don't do this, da, da, da. The next minute, they're doing the exact thing we told them not to do. And we think, did they hear me? Why aren't they listening? So we call it defiance or disobedience. And it's not that at all because the child really doesn't even have the ability to choose what he's going to do. He's completely impulsive. He lives in the moment. He's driven by impulse and desire. And so we call that, sin or disobedience. And it's not. It's just the way they're wired. It's the developmental stage they're in. So instead of faulting them for being like that, we just need to train them. And that's what I'm going to teach you how to do. So what we've been doing is trying to instruct our children when there's nothing programmed in there. It's like trying to type something into your laptop. I've got mine sitting right here in front of me. And there's no software in it. There's nothing installed in it. And so you can, yell at that computer all day long and say, why aren't you responding to my input? It's because there's no software, there's no program. And so what I'm going to teach you is how to program your child rather than instruct him. So when you program him, and then when you give a command, it's automatic because it's just like your computer. Once it's programmed and you push a button, well, it already knows what to do when you push that button. It doesn't have to think about it. It doesn't have to process. Processes, obviously computers have a processor. But I'm just saying that you're going to get the same answer for the same input every time once that computer is programmed to do a certain function. And it's exactly the same with your children. Your kids are a lot more like computers than they are like adult humans. And we treat them like adult humans. And they don't process or experience life anything like adult humans. Like I said, they're more like computers. They're much more predictable. They're programmable. And that's actually our main job as parents, is to program our children. And the reality is you're actually doing that either on purpose or by default, either by design or, by accident. So, because here's the reality is all that information and all that experiences, all the sensory experiences and interactions that your child has in those first 3 years of life, what's actually happening? It's actually forming his subconscious mind. And that's what scientists call we call our worldview. And so our subconscious mind is actually 95% of all of our thoughts. So we think when we're thinking through something or making a decision that we're, if we use our brain, we're going to make a good decision, but your brain isn't even actually what's driving most of your decisions or even behavior. So 95% of what's driving your life is subconscious. And so those first few years of life are critical, and that is when parents have this opportunity to literally script their child's entire life. And so this information I'm sharing with you, it can be used very dangerously, and it has historically. Children have been brainwashed for evil purposes throughout history and even today, because it's easy to do that with children. It's easy to shape how they behave by shaping what they think and believe. So I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So let's go back to their cognitive ability, because I want to make sure that you understand this. So there's 4 stages of brain development. I talked about that. So in this, the delta brainwave state, they're completely receptive. Everything goes in as fact. Yeah, we talked about that. Okay, so they don't have the ability to reason or process information, just to kind of reiterate that as well. And they don't understand the consequences of behavior. They're not sitting there thinking, oh, mom said not to eat cookies before dinner. If I eat one, I'm going to spoil my dinner, or I won't get one later, or mom's going to be mad. They see the cookie and they're like, yum, and they grab it, and they completely don't even remember, because kids live in the moment. So toddlers, little children live in the moment. They don't understand time. So yesterday is completely forgotten, and that's why you have to tell them 1,000 times. How many times do I have to tell you? Well, you have to tell me every time. If that's the way you're trying to train your children, is through that, tell them what to do and hope they do it. So that's why you're so frustrated and having to say things over and over again, because you're talking to his head instead of understanding how to program his subconscious mind. I lost my train of thought there. Let me see where I was at. Just a minute. Okay, yeah, so he doesn't think about time. So tomorrow doesn't exist either, and that's why if you say you can have something later, your child has a meltdown because later doesn't exist. So he lives in the moment. He's very impulsive. He's driven by desire. He doesn't think things through. Does this sound familiar? Sound like your toddler? Yeah, that's the developmental stage they're in. And like I said, if you try to approach that from a cognitive approach, like he thinks like you do, you are going to be so frustrated. And most parents I meet are. They're worn out, they're frazzled, they're discouraged. Their kids are frustrated, because here's what you're doing. You're not just frustrating yourself, you're frustrating your child, because you're not speaking his language. And just like when I went to that first parenting class, when I learned to speak my daughter's language and what she needed to hear in order for her to respond, it was instant. It's just like, trying to brush your teeth with a screwdriver. It doesn't work. It's also painful, and it can cause lasting damage. And the same thing is true about faulty parenting tools. None of us mean to cause lasting damage to our kids, but you can look back to your own childhood and probably point to some things your parents did that probably had a lasting effect on you, negative effect, that you wish you could go back and change, right? But they didn't know either. So I'm glad you're here, because now you're going to know, you're going to be able to avoid those kind of things that sabotage your success. And it's just so powerful. When you learn God's ways, his ways are perfect. They work every time. So, the reality is the traditional way that we've been parenting children in the church is failing, because statistically, 2 out of 3 children raised in Christian homes are leaving the church, walking away from God as young adults. So we know that what we're doing isn't working. So we need to find a new way. So this is all I'm going to share on this video. In the next video, I'm going to share a little bit about your child's spiritual state, because we've misunderstood that as well. So I hope this helped you to understand why your child is the way he is. But for now, I'm going to sign off, and I'll see you in the next video.